At 8:15 on a clear August morning, 350,000 people were living an ordinary day in Hiroshima. Children walked to school. Streetcars ran on time. 44 seconds later, the first nuclear weapon ever used in warfare detonated above them. What survivors endured over the next 24 hours had never happened before, and the most dangerous thing in the city was something none of them could see. At 7 o'clock that morning, the daily AIR raid siren wailed across the delta, a routine sound that residents had learned to safely ignore after months of false alarms. When the all-clear sounded, the city of Hiroshima returned to its quiet wartime patterns. Along Hondori Boulevard, shopkeepers swept their entryways and smoke rose from kitchen stoves as families prepared their breakfast. In the residential districts, a doctor sat on his porch reading the morning newspaper, while nearby, a widow watched her neighbors dismantle a wooden fence for a fire break. Inside the Red Cross hospital, a surgeon carried a blood specimen down a quiet corridor. The warm, humid air carried only the familiar sights and sounds of a community going about its day. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the B-29 superfortress Enola Gay released the atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, from an altitude of 9,400 meters. For 44 seconds, the weapon fell silently through the warm morning air. At 600 meters above the city, just west of the Ikoi Bridge, the bomb detonated, releasing the energy of 15 kilotons of TNT. An orange-white flash, hundreds of times brighter than the sun, instantly consumed the sky. The silent, blinding glare stripped away vision before any sound could travel. Then came the pressure. A violent shockwave tore through the delta, hurling people across rooms, shredding clothing, and snapping streetcar poles. Ground temperatures surged, igniting fires up to 1.5 kilometers away. Thousands of survivors experienced a brief, inexplicable gap in memory. They recalled the flash, but nothing of the blast itself, waking minutes later in complete darkness, pinned beneath the heavy timber of ruined houses. Those who managed to crawl out from the wreckage stepped into a world stripped of all familiar landmarks. The streets, once lined with wooden homes and bustling shops, had vanished beneath a thick shroud of gray dust and burning timber, making the city entirely unrecognizable. Through this haze, figures began to move in a silent, ghostly procession. The heat of the thermal pulse had left devastating marks. Many of those walking had their clothing completely vaporized or reduced to charred rags. Their hair was singed down to a rough stubble close to the scalp, and skin hung from their arms and shoulders in loose, torn ribbons. Most striking was the collective posture of these survivors. They moved slowly through the smoke, holding their arms out in front of them, elbows bent and hands dangling, to prevent raw flesh from touching their bodies. This was the moment where survival ceased to be a shock of luck and became a relentless, physical struggle against pain. The rising heat from the growing firestorm drove thousands of survivors toward the 7 channels of the Oda River. Seeking relief from the intense burning and the suffocating air, desperate crowds pressed down the slopes of the muddy riverbanks. For many, the cool water seemed to be the only escape from the encroaching flames, but the rivers quickly became places of desperation rather than safety. As the crowds plunged into the channels, those who were badly injured or exhausted found themselves too weak to swim or resist the pulling current. Many slipped beneath the surface, unable to fight the moving water. Swollen bodies soon began to fill the channels, drifting slowly downstream toward Hiroshima Bay. Onlookers on the banks could offer no assistance as the rising waterways claimed hundreds of lives. Drowning became a major cause of immediate death in those early hours, proving that even the primary routes of escape offered no protection from the catastrophe. In the struggle to survive, the very geography of the delta turned hostile. By mid-morning, the sky above the burning city turned a bruised, unnatural dark. As the rising firestorm cooled in the upper atmosphere, heavy clouds formed over the delta. Within 20 minutes of the blast, a thick, sticky rain began to fall, turning into a heavy downpour over the next 2 hours. The drops were large, oily, and pitch black with soot and radioactive ash. Driven by intense, searing heat and choking dust, survivors opened their mouths to catch the falling drops or scooped the dark water from surfaces to quench their desperate thirst. In the Koitakasu area, 3 kilometers west, the sticky residue coated scorched skin, leaving acrid streaks. No one in Hiroshima yet understood the concept of radiation. They only knew they were burning, and the sky was offering water. For those seeking medical aid, there was nowhere to turn. The bomb detonated directly above Shima Hospital, instantly killing all 75 patients and staff inside. Across Hiroshima, 80% of the city's hospitals lay in ruins, their structures collapsed and burning. The medical workforce itself was devastated. 90% of the doctors and 92% of the nurses were dead or too severely injured to help. At the Red Cross Hospital, only a tiny fraction of the staff remained on their feet, completely overwhelmed, attempting to treat thousands of horrific injuries with no running water, no electricity, and virtually no medical supplies. Amidst this destruction, a 32-year-old photographer for the Chugoku Shimbun named Yoshito Matsushige walked through the city. Emerging from his damaged home 2.7 kilometers away, he made his way to the Miyuki Bridge. Surrounded by badly burned schoolgirls and desperate crowds, Matsushige held his camera. He would capture the only 5 photographs taken inside Hiroshima on August 6th. He wanted to take more, but after the 5th frame, he stopped. He later explained that the suffering before his lens was so horrifying, and his hands shook so violently with grief that he could not bring himself to press the shutter again. He feared the injured would look at him with anger, wondering why he was taking pictures instead of offering help. As afternoon faded into evening, a different kind of suffering began. Inside the ruins and along the riverbanks, survivors who had escaped the blast without a single burn or scratch suddenly began to collapse. They were seized by violent fits of nausea and relentless vomiting. Within hours, some noticed their gums bleeding. Others ran their hands through their hair only to find it falling out in thick clumps. Neither the victims nor the surviving medical staff could explain what was happening. There was no precedent for these symptoms, no textbook to consult, and no prior knowledge of a nuclear weapon's invisible aftermath. Survival, once defined by escaping the collapsing timber and the firestorm, had silently become an internal, incomprehensible battle against an unseen enemy. The end of the first day was only the beginning of a lifelong struggle. In the years that followed, survivors, known as Hibakusha, faced quiet, enduring isolation. Many struggled to find work, as employers feared their sickness. Others were treated as if they carried a contagious disease, shunned by a public that feared the mysterious effects of the Black Rain. Marriage prospects vanished. Families refused to let children marry survivors, fearing that the radiation would pass through generations. Some chose to hide their status entirely to protect their children from stigma. In July 2025, the number of registered Hibakusha fell below 100,000. As these living witnesses disappear, the urgency to preserve their testimony grows, leaving their recorded memories as the final connection to that August morning. Today, fewer than 100,000 survivors remain. As these final witnesses fade, their lived memories become history. The burden of remembering now falls entirely on us. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to help preserve these vital stories.